The storm came before the banker did. Rain slammed against the tin roof, a ragged drumming that echoed across the cracked plaster walls of the laundry. Wind forced its way through the warped wood frame of the front door, pushing damp air into the space where Clara Redbird stood, hunched over a boiling washtub. Her hands, raw and red, stirred a soaked sheet with a paddle as steam rose into her face and tangled in her hair. Water dripped from the ceiling into the bucket she'd set out beneath the leak. Another drop landed on her shoulder, cold as bone. She barely flinched. Nina coughed behind the curtain that separated the back room from the front, a dry rasp that twisted something inside Clara. The girl had been sick 3 days now, and Clara had scraped together enough coin for Lupe's eucalyptus tonic, but not the doctor. Not unless the laundry brought in more this week than last. Then the bell above the door rang, sharp and sudden, nearly yanked off its hook by the wind. Clara turned. He stepped in like the rain had been chasing him. His black coat was soaked through a thin sheen of water on the brim of his hat, his gloves dripping. He didn't shake off the wet or offer any greeting. Just took 3 steps inside and closed the door behind him with a soft click. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of the boiling water. "I'm looking for Miss Clara Redbird." The voice was deep and smooth with the kind of even tone that didn't need to be loud to demand attention. Clara gripped the paddle tighter. "You found her," she said, "though I'm a Mrs., not a Miss." His eyes moved across the room, not with disgust, but calculation. The warped floor, the sagging shelves, the worn washtubs. He saw it all, and Clara saw him seeing it, tall, broad-shouldered, pale from the indoor life hair, slicked back like a banker or a snake. "I'm Silas McAllister. I own First Bank of Silver Butte." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bundle of papers, neatly tied with twine. "3 days ago, I acquired your debt from Mr. Greer. He neglected to inform you, I presume." Clara felt the cold in her chest long before the wind found her skin. "What do you want? I've come to collect." He set the papers on the nearest table, careful not to let them touch the wet. She wiped her hands on her apron, even though they were already clean. "I've been paying it down. Every week." Mr. Greer never had a complaint. "Indeed," Silas said, "but he also didn't collect interest. Nor did he enforce the terms of the contract." He opened the top paper and read without emotion. $800 borrowed by one Thomas Redbird. Payment overdue by 4 months. Clara's mouth went dry. Her late husband had borrowed that money to open the laundry. He died 3 weeks after it opened, fever burning him to nothing. Now she was left holding the basin. "I'll pay it," she said, "but I need time. I'm offering you exactly that. Time with conditions." He looked around again. "This building is on land I intend to use for expansion, but I don't evict tenants who meet their obligations." Clara's shoulders squared. "How much?" $20 a week, he said flatly. "For 3 months. If you pay it on time each time, I'll grant another 3 months and so on until the debt is cleared." She laughed once, short, humorless. $20 a week, this laundry barely brings in that much. Then find a way to make it bring more. There's no work to steal. I already take orders from the hotel, the sheriff, the butcher's wife. "You've got hands, Mrs. Redbird," he said, not unkindly. "And this town's got dirty clothes." He turned to go, but Clara stepped forward. "You think this is a game, that I'm some kind of charity case you can fix with numbers and ink? That's my sister behind that curtain. She's 10. She has school. She has a cough I can't afford to treat." Silas stopped. Slowly he turned back toward her. Something in his face shifted just barely. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a way for you to keep the only roof over your heads. Clara didn't speak. Couldn't. The anger and fear were too thick in her throat. First payment due this Friday, he said, reaching for the door. Before noon. If you're late, the deal ends. I reclaim the property. He paused with his hand on the doorframe. Rain roared just outside. I'll be checking in, he added, from time to time, out of curiosity. Curiosity, she echoed. His lips twitched into something too sharp to be a smile. I've never met a woman who chose pride over surrender. I'm curious to see how long you last. Then he was gone. Clara stood in the empty room, her hands trembling, chest full of boiling water and ice. She didn't cry. Not when the roof dripped again. Not when Nina whispered from behind the curtain, "Who was that?" Not when the cold air hit her face and reminded her just how close they were to losing everything. She sat on the low stool by the stove, staring at nothing. For a long time, the only sound was the rain on the roof and Nina's breathing. Later, long after the last sheet had been scrubbed and hung, after the bread had been rationed and the tonic given, Clara stepped out onto the porch. A white envelope lay at the base of the door. She bent down slowly, wary like it might bite. Inside, a clean $5 bill folded neat and a small note in a clean hand. Advance for laundry. We'll bring shirts tomorrow. S. Clara stared at the bill, then at the street beyond. The lamps on the main road flickered in the wind. Somewhere out there he was watching. Not with pity, not with malice, with interest. She closed the door, tucked the money into her apron, and fed the fire. If Silas McAllister wanted to watch, then fine. Let him. She'd give him a damn show. A man don't leave money on a doorstep unless he's after something, and I don't mean laundry. The $5 bill sat in a chipped blue dish by the stove, folded so neatly it looked unnatural in Clara's cluttered little kitchen. Every time she passed it, her eyes caught on it, her thoughts snagged like cotton on wire. She'd planned to spend the day counting linens and preparing new starch, but the money burned hotter than the fire in the stove. She kept seeing his handwriting. Precise, no flourish, just advance for laundry. We'll bring shirts tomorrow. S. She hadn't asked for his help. She hadn't told him she'd fall short, and yet there it was. Enough to cover the soap and maybe some more eucalyptus for Nina. Maybe even a fresh roll of cloth for towels if the week went well. Is that from the banker? Nina's voice drifted from the back room, scratchy but stronger than the day before. Clara pulled the curtain aside. Her sister sat up in bed, tangled in blankets, cheeks flushed from sleep and leftover fever. It is, Clara answered. Why'd he give it to you? Clara forced a shrug. Advance for shirts, he said. Wants me to do his laundry now. He's rich. Doesn't he have servants for that? Clara smiled faintly. Some rich men like their collars starched just so. Nina's brow wrinkled. He's not scary like I thought. He's just cold, like ice that talks. Clara chuckled softly and handed her a mug of warm water with honey. Drink this, then rest. I have errands to run. Outside Silver Butte stretched out under a thin layer of leftover rain. The ground was muddy, the wooden sidewalks slick with damp grit. Clara walked fast, scarf tight around her head, boots splashing lightly as she headed to Lupe Ortega's herbal shop. The smell hit first dry herbs, fire smoke, and lemon balm. The small adobe building sat just off the main road, half hidden behind a wall of flowering sage. Clara knocked once and stepped inside. Lupe stood barefoot by the stove, grinding dried bark into a paste. Her dark braid hung down the center of her back, streaked silver like lightning across a night sky. You look like you didn't sleep, Lupe said without turning. Didn't, Clara replied. Didn't mean to, just didn't. Lupe tapped the edge of the bowl and finally faced her. That cough still hanging on your girl, Clara nodded. It's better, your tea helped. But I need more. You need more of a lot of things. Lupe eyed her, then gestured to the table. Sit. Tell me. Clara sat. She stared at her hands, still red from scrubbing, and let the words come. She told Lupe about the banker, about the new terms, about the roof and the envelope and the neat $5 bill folded like a test. When she finished, Lupe set the mortar down with a quiet thunk. A man don't leave money on a doorstep unless he's after something, she said. And I don't mean laundry. Clara frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means he's watching you. You think he came to break your back? Maybe. But now he's looking to see what you do with the weight. Clara crossed her arms. I'm not some mule for him to study. Didn't say you were. But he's still watching. So stand tall while he does. Clara didn't answer right away. Lupe handed her a fresh sachet of eucalyptus, a bit of willow bark for fever, and a small bottle of cough tonic. She paid from the $5 bill and walked back into town with the rest tucked tight in her apron pocket. By the time she reached the laundry, the clouds were thinning, and the light cast the street in a soft, pewter-colored haze. She paused at the door. Her name painted in her husband's shaky hand still flaked from the old wood sign Redbird Laundry. Inside the stove was warm and the steam was thick. She tied her apron, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Before sunset, the door creaked open again. Evening came, the voice she already recognized. Silas McAllister stepped inside with a small leather satchel. He looked drier than last time, less like a thundercloud, and more like a man just passing through. You said you'd bring shirts tomorrow, Clara said. I got impatient. He held up the satchel. 3 shirts, 2 vests, and a handkerchief. She took it careful not to let their fingers brush. 2 days. He nodded, but didn't leave. His eyes roamed the room again. Place smells clean. It's a laundry, she said, brushing a lock of damp hair from her forehead. I've been in a few that didn't. She didn't answer. Your roof, he added, glancing up at the ceiling. Still leaks, Clara narrowed her eyes. Not since the roofer showed up. Without being asked. Silas looked directly at her. I assumed you'd be practical enough to let him work. I was practical enough to know I had no choice. You had a choice, he said. You took the smart one. The tension between them was strange, thick, but not heavy, like a rope pulled just taut enough to feel. Clara turned away and began sorting a pile of linens. You need anything else? No. There was a pause then. Just checking on my investment. She scoffed. You sure say that word a lot. It's the correct word. No, Clara said, still not looking at him. The correct word is people. I'm not your livestock, Mr. McAllister. I'm not something you fix and trade. She heard the quiet shift of his feet. Noted. And then he left. The door closed gently behind him, no drama in his exit. Just the smell of wet wool and starch left in the air. Later that night, after Nina had fallen asleep to the soft whistle of the kettle, Clara sat at the small table by the window. She lit the oil lamp and opened her ledger. $20 due by Friday. She had 6, now 11. If she worked straight through tomorrow and begged the hotel to pay early, she might make it. Might. She glanced toward the street. Somewhere beyond the dark, behind those heavy brick walls of the bank, Silas McAllister was sitting with his ledgers and contracts and curiosity. Let him watch. She wasn't bending. She wasn't breaking, but she was beginning to understand something dangerous. Curiosity wasn't always the banker's. Sometimes it belonged to the woman he couldn't stop watching. This isn't charity, Miss Redbird. It's an investment in my asset. The hammering woke her. Clara Redbird sat bolt upright in bed, the chill air pressing down like a wet blanket. Her heart kicked fast until she realized the sound wasn't thunder. It was coming from the roof. Boots on the shingles. A hammer striking wood. She threw on her shawl and stepped into the front room just as Nina stirred beneath the covers. The girl blinked up from the small cot near the stove. "What's that?" Clara pressed a finger to her lips. "Stay here." She opened the front door to a morning of pale gold light and sharp wind. A man was crouched on the roof, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand. A pile of shingles sat beside him in a canvas bag. "Excuse me," Clara shouted. The man paused, glanced down and offered a half grin. "Mornin', ma'am. Don't mind me. Mr. McAllister sent me." She stepped further outside, arms crossed tight against the wind. "To do what exactly?" "Fix the rest of your roof." Said it was overdue. Clara didn't answer. She stared up at him, the sunlight cutting across her face. "I'll be out of your hair by sundown," the man said, tipping his hat before returning to work. "Name's Cal if you need anything." She didn't thank him. She shut the door with more force than needed and paced the narrow room, hands trembling not from cold, but from rage. Later, with Nina dressed and sipping tea at the table, Clara tied on her apron and muttered, "He thinks he owns the place." "Who?" Nina asked, eyebrows raised. Clara didn't answer. By mid-morning, she had folded and stacked 4 hotel sheets, pressed a set of table linens, and scrubbed 2 of Silas McAllister's shirts with more aggression than necessary. When she caught herself grinding the fabric too hard, she forced herself to breathe. At noon, she marched straight to the bank. The lobby smelled like ink and dust, and men who didn't touch laundry unless it belonged to their wives. Clara stood out like a bloodstain on white linen, wind-blown hair, red-knuckled hands, apron still damp from steam. The clerk behind the counter blinked at her. "I need to speak with Mr. McAllister," she said, voice calm but brittle. "He's in a meeting at the moment." "Then tell him Clara Redbird's here about his investment." The words hit harder than she expected. The clerk flinched, then disappeared down the hall. A minute later, the office door opened, and Silas stood in the doorway, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled, tie loosened. He looked less like a banker and more like a man who'd just wrestled with numbers and lost. "Miss Redbird," he said, voice even. "Come in." She entered without waiting. He shut the door behind her. "Why is there a man on my roof?" "Because it leaks," he said simply, moving behind his desk. "And winter's coming. I didn't ask you to fix it. I didn't wait for you to." Clara planted her hands on the edge of his desk. "I don't need your help." Silas met her stare. "You need your roof fixed. Unless you'd prefer it caves in come January. I would have handled it. When before or after you missed another payment." She flushed. Her arms dropped to her sides. "That's not your call." "It is," he said, leaning forward, "when your ability to pay me depends on whether your roof holds through the season. This isn't charity, Miss Redbird. It's an investment in my asset." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Don't call me that." He sat back. "What would you prefer?" "Partner, client, tenant, human being would be a start." Silas's jaw tightened. "You came here to object to a repaired roof. I'd be interested to hear the logic." Clara stepped back, suddenly unsure of her footing. She wasn't wrong to be angry, but she didn't like the way the heat drained out of her when he didn't rise to meet it. He didn't bark. He didn't insult. he reasoned, and it left her nowhere to go but honesty. "I don't want to owe you anything more than I already do," she said. "Not favors, not kindness." "I'm not asking for gratitude," he replied. "Just for you to keep showing up on Fridays with your $20. I plan to. Then we're square." She hesitated. He watched her. "I don't trust you," she said finally. "I don't trust that this isn't about control." "Of course it is," he said so plainly it made her breath hitch. "I control a business. I collect debts. I set terms. I don't pretend to be a savior, but you pretend to care." This time something flickered in his face. Not surprise, not hurt, recognition. He stood slowly, moved toward the window behind his desk and looked out. "It was your husband who painted that sign, wasn't it?" he asked. "Redbird Laundry." She stiffened. "What of it? You've kept it even though the paint's peeling." "It's his name. And mine." Silas turned back toward her. "That's not control. That's memory. We both hold on to things." Clara didn't move. The room felt smaller than it had minutes ago. "I'll pay you every week," she said. "I'll make it work. I don't doubt that." He walked her to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. "If you send anyone else to my roof or through my door, let me know first." He inclined his head. "Fair enough." She stepped out into the bright, cold street, blinking hard. The wind hadn't let up. Neither had the murmurs. On her way back, she passed the general store. Outside, a few women stood talking. One of them, Mrs. Templeton, the merchant's wife, narrowed her eyes when she saw Clara. Clara walked on. That evening after Nina went to bed, and the last of the steam had left the tubs, Clara sat by the stove. She held her ledger open pencil tapping against the margins. The day's income, $11.70. Expenses, soap starch, willow bark. Remaining $4.20. Still short. Still behind. She turned toward the fire and adjusted the gloves on her lap, the ones Silas had sent last week. Thick. Too fine for laundry work. Too kind to accept. And yet they fit. Just like the way he looked at her. Not with pity. Not with scorn. With interest. She hated that. She hated that she didn't hate it. Outside, the hammering on the roof had stopped. A soft knock came at the front door. She opened it slowly. Zeke Harper stood there, hat in hand. He smelled of horses and cedar smoke. "Evenin'," he said. "Heard you had a roof job going. Figured you might need help hauling wood tomorrow." Clara blinked. Why, Zeke shrugged. "Man's gotta eat. You cook better than most." She stepped aside. "Come early. I start before sunrise." He tipped his hat. "Wouldn't expect less." She closed the door behind him, leaned her back against it, and exhaled. The roof was fixed. The banker was watching. And now the town had started to talk. "You'd turn us out for 30 cents. Clara's boots slapped the muddy street apron strings trailing behind her as she clutched the small coin purse tight in her fist. The town bell had already chimed 10. She had 50 minutes left. That should have been enough. Except it wasn't. The hotel ledger had been off. They'd counted wrong or held back or just decided to wait another day to pay. And now Clara was short. By 30 cents. Not $3, not even $1. 30. She cursed herself under her breath. She should have double-checked, should have waited outside the hotel kitchen for the manager instead of taking the errand boy's word. But Nina had a fever spike that morning, and Zeke needed payment for hauling wood, and the stove had to be fed. Now she was here rushing through town, heart thudding like it would rattle right out of her ribs. The bank came into view, its red brick walls rising stern and steady above the plank sidewalks. The clean white trim, the glint of the brass doorknob, the clear glass windows without grime. She wiped her hands on her skirt as she climbed the steps, breath hitching in her chest. The lobby was quiet. One clerk sat behind the counter scratching figures in a ledger. Another customer, a rancher with sun-chapped cheeks, tipped his hat to her and left. She stepped up to the desk. "Here to see Mr. McAllister." The clerk, the same one from earlier in the week, blinked at her with something like pity in his eyes. "Just a moment." This time Silas came out of the back office quickly. He looked the same as always, composed, pressed, unreadable. But his tie was a little loose today, the collar of his shirt slightly wilted, like the morning hadn't gone to plan. Clara opened her coin purse and set it down on the polished wood counter between them. $19.70, she said. His brow furrowed. "You're short." "I know. How much 30 cents? He stared at her. "I'll have it by this evening," she said. "The hotel's late. They'll pay before supper." His eyes didn't move from her face. "You know the terms. I'm not trying to cheat you," she said, keeping her voice level. "I've never been late before. And I'm not asking to skip. Just a few hours' grace." He said nothing. The silence dragged. She clenched her jaw. "You'd turn us out for 30 cents. He didn't flinch. And then, with the smallest shift in his expression, barely a breath, he reached forward and pushed the coin purse back toward her. "This one time," he said. Clara's shoulders dropped. Not in relief, in something closer to disbelief. "I'll bring the rest by tonight," she said. "I know you will." She left before her pride started leaking out her eyes. On the walk back to the laundry, her breath came in sharp, even pulls. She hated asking, hated needing, hated the way he hadn't yelled or judged, just let her stew in it. Let her see how close she'd come to losing everything over a mistake not even her own. When she stepped inside, Nina was curled on the floor near the stove, a book open in her lap. "You're back fast," the girl said. Clara nodded. "Short trip. You get it paid?" Clara nodded again, quieter this time. Zeke was already out back, chopping the last of the kindling. He came in not long after, dusted off his boots, and helped Clara hang the last of the linens. "You look like someone tried to drown your cat," he muttered. She offered a tired smile. "I was short. At the bank." His eyebrows lifted. He let it slide. "This once." "Hell," Zeke said, not unkindly. "Maybe the man's got a soul under all that starch. Or maybe he just likes watching me squirm." Zeke chuckled, hung his towel, and didn't press further. That was one of the things Clara liked about him. He didn't poke where it hurt. That evening, just as the sun started to sink behind the hills, Clara returned to the bank. Silas was gone for the day, but the clerk took her 30 cents without a word and recorded it neatly in the ledger. She turned to leave, but Mrs. Templeton was standing at the door. Their eyes met. The merchant's wife was wrapped in a fur-lined coat, too fine for the desert chill, gloved hands clutching her satchel as though Clara might snatch it. "Evening," Clara said. Mrs. Templeton gave a thin smile. "I suppose the laundry's keeping you comfortable. As comfortable as clean sheets can manage." The woman tilted her head. "I do hope Mr. McAllister isn't letting sympathy get in the way of good business." Clara's spine stiffened. "He's not the sympathetic type," Mum Templeton said, and stepped aside just enough to let her pass. Clara walked through the door without another word. Her jaw ached from keeping it shut. Back at home, Nina had dozed off by the fire. Clara covered her with a quilt, then sat at the table and stared at the ledger. The numbers weren't forgiving. She'd need new soap by Monday and starch and the bleach powder Lupe had promised to order. But she had a roof, and heat, and enough to keep going. For now. She picked up the gloves again, still unused, still too fine, and slipped them on. The wool was soft, but the seams were strong. The kind of gift that said, "I see how hard you work, even if I never say it out loud." That unsettled her more than a gift of money ever could. She took them off again and folded them into a drawer. Then she stepped outside to shake out the linens before the frost came. The sky had gone deep blue stars, beginning to peek through the gauze of clouds. The night was quiet, the kind that made the world feel watchful. She held a sheet in her hands, the fabric catching the breeze like a sail, and tried to remember the last time someone had done something kind without asking anything in return. It wasn't that she didn't believe people could be good. It was just that lately goodness came with ledgers. In the dark, the door creaked open behind her. Clara turned, startled. It was Silas. He stood on the edge of the porch, no hat, no coat, just his usual quiet stillness. "Didn't expect you," Clara said. "I was passing by the laundry at night." He almost smiled. "Curiosity." She crossed her arms. "Dangerous habit. So I've been told." He stepped closer, looked at the folded sheets on the rail. "They always smell this clean." Clara arched an eyebrow. "When someone else scrubs them, maybe." Silas didn't laugh, but his mouth twitched. "You paid. That's all that matters. And the gloves." He looked down as if remembering. "A courtesy. From a banker, I'm full of surprises." She tilted her head. "You're not full of anything. You're just hard to read." He took a breath like he might say more. But he didn't. Just tipped his head and stepped off the porch. "Good night, Miss Redbird." She watched him walk away, disappearing down the street, like a shadow that didn't quite belong to the night. Clara turned back toward the sheets and exhaled slowly, her breath curling like smoke in the cold. She still didn't know what kind of game he was playing, but she was no one's pawn. "I don't need your kindness. I just need to survive." Clara pressed her knuckles against the glass pane of the front window, watching the street through the thin layer of morning frost. A pair of townsfolk walked past Mr. Lane from the livery, and that whispering young wife he'd married from over in Flagstaff. They paused when they caught sight of her in the window. Didn't wave. Just kept walking, their voices dropping low. She didn't have to hear the words. The glances were enough. Behind her, Nina sneezed twice, then started humming as she braided a rag doll's yarn hair. Her voice was small but cheerful, untouched by the sharp edge of adult judgment. Clara exhaled and turned from the window. She pulled on her apron and slipped the gloves over her hands, the ones Silas had given her. They weren't fancy anymore, just warm, practical. She stepped into the steam-warmed room of the laundry, picked up a brush, and got to work scrubbing one of Silas's shirts. The man had a habit of wearing clean whites, even in mud season. She didn't know what he did to the cuffs, but every week they came back dirtied, just enough to prove he was still made of flesh and not paper and ink. The bell over the door rang an hour later. Clara looked up, half expecting Silas again, but it was Lupe holding a small basket and wearing that sideways smile of hers. "I brought some things," Lupe said, pushing through the steam like it wasn't even there. "Black bean stew, some greens, bread still warm." Clara frowned. "I didn't ask, and I didn't say you had to." Lupe set the basket on the counter. "Call it a trade. I got a busted shawl needs mending, And maybe I wanted to see how the town's latest scandal was holding up. Clara scoffed. You mean me? Lupe leaned a hip against the counter and crossed her arms. Folks are talking. They always do. True. But they don't always talk this loud. Clara dipped a sheet into rinse-water shoulders, tightening. Because I took a loan because of the man behind the loan. Lupe lowered her voice. You're not the only one he's helping. But you're the only one folks think he's lingering with. Clara dropped the sheet back in the tub. Water splashed up her sleeves. I don't need his kindness. I just need to survive. Lupe didn't respond right away, just studied her with eyes too sharp for someone who smiled so gently. And what if it's not kindness? Lupe asked. What if it's something else? What if the man sees you and doesn't know what to do with that? Clara shook her head. He's a banker. He doesn't see people, just ledgers. Lupe grinned. Even a banker's got eyes. That evening, Zeke arrived with a bundle of old blankets and half a sack of flour. Found 'em over by the church. Figured you'd use 'em better. Clara accepted them with a nod. Zeke lingered in the doorway longer than usual, then jerked his head toward the street. You ought to know, he said, Mrs. Templeton's been asking around. Subtle, but not subtle. About what you? The banker. Whether you're being helped or helped. Clara swallowed hard. Let her ask. I've got nothing to hide. Zeke didn't answer, just looked at her the way a man does when he sees a wall starting to crack and knows he can't stop the bricks from falling. After he left, Clara sat by the stove with Nina tucked beside her. The girl's fever had eased, but the cough lingered like a ghost. Why don't people like him? Nina asked suddenly. Clara blinked. Who, Mr. McAllister? You said he's not kind, but he doesn't seem mean either. Clara hesitated. People don't like what they don't understand, and they especially don't like what makes them feel small. Nina wrinkled her nose. He doesn't make you feel small. Clara touched her sister's hair. No, not quite. She didn't say what he did make her feel stretched, exposed, uncertain, like a land not yet mapped. The next morning, the laundry opened early. Business was steady, 2 orders from the boarding house, 1 from the school marm. But Clara could still feel the difference. People handed over their laundry, with stiff fingers, avoided her gaze, talked in whispers just a little too close. By midday, she was ready to scream. Then the bell rang again, and there he was. Silas stood in the doorway holding another satchel. His coat was dusted with road grit, his collar turned up against the cold. He looked like he hadn't slept well. She wasn't sure why that mattered. Miss Redbird, he said with a small nod. She didn't return it. Another week, another shirt. He stepped forward, set the satchel down. 2 shirts, 1 vest. Anything else? He looked at her eyes, steady. Is that stew I smell? She blinked. What? He nodded toward the back. Smells like black beans and cumin. Lupe. Yes. She always did know how to season a pot. His voice softened just slightly. Mind if I ask how your sister's doing? Clara crossed her arms. She's better. I'm glad to hear it. Silence stretched. You didn't come for the stew or the shirts, she said finally. So what is it? He straightened his coat sleeves. I heard some talk. I'm sure you did. They're questioning your reputation. They're questioning yours too. I don't care about mine. Well, Clara said tightly, I care about mine. His jaw shifted. Do you want me to stop coming? She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Did she? Did she want the visits to end, the strange comfort of his presence? The way he always saw her, not just the work, but the woman behind it. I want you to stop thinking I'm your responsibility, she said. I don't need you to fix things. I haven't offered to fix anything. You sent a man to patch my roof. You left money on my doorstep. You gave me gloves. That's not fixing, he said, voice quiet. That's noticing. She stared at him, every nerve tense. I don't know what this is, she said, but I can't afford to be anyone's charity. Not yours. Not the town's. His face softened. You've never been charity. Not for a second. Then he left. No sharp goodbyes. No look back. Just the door closing behind him with that same soft click it always did. Clara stood still for a long time, the air thick with steam and unsaid things. Outside, the wind picked up. Dust skittered across the street. And down the road, just beyond the reach of the front window, Mrs. Templeton watched from across the boardwalk, her hands folded around a silver parasol. Watching. Waiting. And Clara knew the next storm wasn't going to come from the sky. A man like that doesn't knock unless he plans to ruin your peace. The knock came just after sunset. It wasn't loud, just 3 solid raps on the door, steady as a drum. Clara froze at the wash basin, her hands dripping with rinse water, the laundry room already dim and silent, except for the ticking clock above the stove. Nina looked up from the floor where she was stringing old buttons onto a bit of twine. Are we expecting someone? Clara shook her head slowly. No. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the room. Through the window, she saw the outline of a tall figure silhouetted by the last pale light of day. Straight back, broad shoulders. No hat, Silas. Clara opened the door, not fully just enough for her body to block the view inside. You're late, she said. I didn't come for laundry. You never do. He held something wrapped in brown paper. I brought apples. She blinked at him. Apples. They came in on the freight line. Fresh. Thought your sister might like a few. Clara hesitated. The air between them felt different tonight. Thicker. Heavier. Not charged like before, but uncertain. Come in, she said at last. He stepped inside and took off his gloves, careful with the mud on his boots. The scent of starch and firewood filled the room. He handed her the parcel. The apples inside were small, red, still cold from travel. I appreciate it, Clara said, setting them on the table. But it's late. People will talk. They already are, Silas replied. Clara turned toward the stove, stoked the coals with a practiced hand. Then let's not give them more to say. He didn't respond, but she could feel him watching her quietly, like someone reading a page he didn't quite understand. I heard you had a visitor, he said after a pause. She glanced over her shoulder. Zeke drops by sometimes. I wasn't talking about Zeke. She stilled. Then who, Mrs. Templeton? Her jaw clenched. She stopped by the bank this morning, Silas added. Said she was concerned. Clara laughed without humor. That woman's never been concerned about anything that didn't reflect in a mirror. She asked about your payments. About the arrangement. Clara turned to face him fully now. And what did you tell her that it wasn't her business? She studied him for a long beat. And that satisfied her, not even close. But I don't answer to her. Or to anyone for that matter. Clara folded her arms. So why tell me Silas looked away just for a moment? Because I've seen what women like that can do when they decide you don't belong. A banker standing up for the poor laundress. Now that's a tale. You're not just a laundress. No, Clara said, voice harder now. I'm a woman scraping to stay warm, keep her sister fed, and keep a roof over their heads. And I don't need to be saved. Especially not by you. Silas didn't flinch. I never said you did. Then what is this? Apple's gloves. Roof repairs, you watching me like you're waiting to see whether I fall or fly. What do you want from me, Silas? Exhaled, slow and tired. I don't know. That stopped her. Not because it was a trick, but because it sounded honest. Clara looked at him for what felt like the first time, not the banker, not the one holding her debt, but the man, the wear in his eyes, the shadow behind his voice. You don't strike me as a man who doesn't know what he wants, she said softly. Lately, he replied, I've been striking myself differently too. Nina peeked in from the back room, then ducked out again, with the speed of someone who knew grown-up talk when she heard it. Clara stepped aside and pointed to a chair. You might as well sit if you're staying. He sat slow and deliberate. She poured water into a pot and set it on the stove, the silence between them filling again, but not with tension, with something else. Do you regret it? She asked suddenly. Silas looked up. What? Buying the debt. Getting involved. His fingers tapped against the tabletop once. No. But you didn't expect me, she said. No, he admitted. I expected a broken building and an old ledger, not you. She met his eyes, and it struck her how little space there really was between them. You were different in the beginning, she said. So were you. The kettle whistled softly. Clara poured 2 mugs and slid one across the table. He took it, sipped, then smiled faintly. You burn the coffee. I make it strong. It could peel paint. She laughed, and it caught her off guard. It had been a long time since something bubbled out of her without warning. Silas smiled back, not the polished banker's smile. Something real, uneven, younger. Outside, the wind had picked up. A shutter banged softly against the siding. You think they'll come for me? She asked, quieter now. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. If they can't shame you, they'll isolate you. That's how it always begins. Then what? Then they pretend they were right about you all along. Clara stared into her cup. A man like that doesn't knock unless he plans to ruin your peace, she murmured. Silas looked up. She wasn't talking about Mrs. Templeton anymore. I never meant to ruin anything, he said. But you have, she said, not cruel, just true. You made me question the line I've been walking for 2 years between surviving and disappearing. You don't disappear, he said, even when you try. The silence stretched again, longer this time. The fire hissed in the stove. The apples sat untouched on the table. I don't know what you're looking for, Clara said, but you won't find it here. Not the way you want. Silas nodded, slowly, like a man carrying something heavier than he could name. I should go. She stood with him, walked him to the door. When he reached for the handle, he paused. You won't fall, she blinked. You said earlier you think I'm waiting to see if you fall or fly. But I'm not. She opened the door. The cold reached in. Good night, Mr. McAllister. He stepped out. Good night, Miss Redbird. She closed the door after him, locked it, then leaned her forehead against the wood. Outside, the wind blew harder, and across the street, a light blinked out in the Templeton home. Someone had been watching. Clara turned off the stove, carried the apples to the cupboard, and tucked them away like something sacred. She didn't know what was coming, but it was moving now, steady as a storm. When a town decides what kind of woman you are, truth don't matter much. The church bell rang once, sharp and distant, a hollow sound that hung in the frozen morning air. Clara's hands worked briskly over the washboard, red from the cold, despite the gloves she hadn't taken off since sunrise. The laundry room was warm with steam and lye, but she still felt the chill, and it wasn't from the weather. The knock from the night before had faded, but the echo of it hadn't. Silas hadn't come back. Not yesterday. Not this morning. And though she hadn't expected him, his absence sat in the corner of her thoughts like a shadow that wouldn't leave. A louder thump startled her. The back door. She wiped her hands and cracked it open. Lupe stood there, hair pinned up her wool shawl clutched tight. Her face was tighter than usual, her mouth set in a thin line. "You need to hear it from someone who gives a damn," Lupe said. Clara stepped back. "What is it?" They held a council meeting last night. A town meeting, unofficial. Just the right kind of people with the wrong kind of power. Lupe stepped inside, warming her hands over the stove. Mrs. Templeton, Pastor Dunn, the school marm, a few men with dry hearts and long memories. Clara felt a pit open beneath her ribs. "What do they want?" "They say your arrangement with McAllister is inappropriate, that you're being favored, that it's..." She flicked her hand, morally compromising. "I wash his clothes," Clara snapped. "That's the arrangement." Lupe looked at her hard. "That's not what they're saying. I've done nothing wrong. When a town decides what kind of woman you are, truth don't matter much." Clara stepped back, her chest tight. "They can't touch me. They're already trying. There's talk of removing your laundry contract with the school. The hotel might pull theirs too, just to keep the peace. That's half your income, Clara." For a moment, all Clara could hear was the drip, drip, drip of rinse water from the laundry line. "They want me to crawl," she said. "They want you gone," Lupe replied. "Or broken." Nina appeared in the doorway, yawning and rubbing her eyes. "Go lie down a bit longer," Clara said gently. Nina looked between the two women, then disappeared without a word. Lupe stepped closer. "This is going to get worse. You need allies. I don't have any." "You've got me." Clara blinked hard. And Zeke, Lupe added, "You know he'd show up if the ground cracked open under you." Clara nodded slowly, but something else had rooted deep. If she lost the hotel and the school, she wouldn't make the next payment. And if she missed it, she'd lose the laundry. The house, everything. By noon, word had spread faster than wildfire. Zeke came in with a sack of grain and a tight look in his eyes. "You hear I did," Clara said. "They say you're keeping company with McAllister behind closed doors." "Let them say it." Zeke set the grain down with more force than needed. "I ain't the kind to lecture. But you gotta fight back, Clara. You don't, and they'll take everything." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "How do you fight whispers?" Zeke's jaw worked. "You make a louder noise." The door opened again, this time slower. Clara turned. Silas stood there, holding a sheet of paper in one hand. His coat was dusted with road salt, eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept. "I heard," he said quietly. Clara crossed her arms. "And they're trying to push you out." "No," she said. "They're trying to push you out of me." He looked at her with a kind of worn tenderness. "Let me help. I don't need help." "You will." She moved past him and picked up a stack of clean shirts. I won't be your scandal, she said. You already are, he said gently. Clara froze. He stepped forward. But you're also the reason this town keeps its linens white, its hotel guests comfortable, its students clean in uniform. You've held this place together longer than most of them have held a marriage. She turned slowly. Then why do they hate me? They don't hate you. They hate that you didn't fold. Her breath caught. They hate that you walked through hell, came out cleaner than them, and still hold your head up. His voice softened. Let them hate. You don't have to live with it, she said. He met her eyes. I'd live with a lot worse to stand beside you. Silence settled, then broke when the door flew open again. Nina rushed in, cheeks red. There's a man at the school. He's asking for you. Clara didn't wait. She tore off her apron and dashed out the door, her boots crunching snow as she ran down the street, her heart in her throat. At the schoolhouse, a small group stood on the front steps. The schoolmarm arms folded, lips pursed. A man in a town badge, Deputy Hall, and beside them, Pastor Dunn. Clara slowed her approach. Miss Redbird, the deputy said. Yes, we've received a formal complaint about your presence here. She blinked. I'm not present. I deliver laundry. The schoolmarm sniffed. We no longer require your services. Clara stared at her. You've been satisfied with my work for over a year. We're making a change, the woman said. For moral clarity. Pastor Dunn nodded solemnly. And the hotel, Clara asked. No one answered. She turned away before they could see the tears burning her eyes. As she passed Lupe's shop, she heard a voice call out. Clara! Lupe stepped outside holding a letter. What is it? Clara asked, breathless. From the council. Clara took it, hands shaking. She opened it slowly. It was a notice of revocation. Her operating permit would be reviewed. Her business could be suspended pending a hearing led by the very people whispering behind closed doors. Her knees nearly buckled. Lupe grabbed her by the shoulders. You don't let them take this without screaming. I don't scream, Clara whispered. Then speak. Clara stared down the street. I need to see McAllister. You think he'll fix this? No, she said. I think I'll fix it. But I need to look him in the eye when I do. She turned the letter clenched in her hand like a match ready to strike. The town had spoken. Now she would answer. If you want them to hear you, Clara, you'll have to speak in a voice they can't ignore. The bank doors stood tall and unbothered, gleaming in the winter light, like the gates to something holy or cruel. Clara pushed through them without hesitation, the letter from the council folded tight in her hand. Her boots were still wet from the slush of the street, and her skirt carried the scent of soap and ash. The clerk at the desk stood when he saw her mouth open as if to speak. I need to see Mr. McAllister, she said before he could. Tell him it's urgent. Tell him it's Clara Redbird, and I'm not leaving until he comes out. The man swallowed and disappeared down the hallway. Clara stood still. She felt every eye on her two men waiting in the lobby, a woman holding a coin purse, and looking down her nose, a boy sweeping near the back. She didn't look away. Let them watch. Let them see. The door to Silas's office opened. He stood in the frame, brows drawn together, no jacket sleeves rolled back to the elbows. His shirt was rumpled like he hadn't bothered to iron it this morning. His eyes met hers with the same calm, unreadable steadiness he always carried. But there was a crease in his brow he wasn't hiding anymore. Come in, he said. Clara followed him inside. The door clicked closed behind her, muffling the murmur of the world outside. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it once, then again, jaw tightening. When he looked up, something in his expression had shifted. "They're trying to shut you down," he said. "They've already started. The school cut their contract. The hotel's leaning. This is next." Silas walked to the window, the paper still in hand. "I knew they'd push. I didn't know they'd go this far." "You didn't know," Clara said, voice sharp, "because you don't have to live like this. You make deals in quiet rooms. I scrape for dignity, with people watching my every move, and now they've decided I'm too loud." Silas turned to her. "You've never been anything but dignified. Tell that to the council, to the women whispering about my morals, to the men judging whether my business deserves to survive." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Tell it to them yourself, oh." She blinked. "What? You're not going to win this by staying quiet. You want to fight them, then fight. In public. At the hearing. Make them say it out loud." "I'm not like them." "Exactly," he said. "And they don't know what to do with someone who doesn't shrink." He crossed to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "You've kept records, every payment, every order, every delivery. Bring them. If they want to hold a hearing, you hold a trial." "I don't want to beg." "You won't," he said. "You'll stand." "That's different." Clara looked down at her gloves, faded now from use, soft at the edges. She pulled them off slowly, fingers trembling. "They think I got here by lying down," she said. "They don't understand what it took to build this." "I do," Silas said quietly. She looked up. "There's more than one way to be respectable," he added. "Yours was earned. Theirs was inherited." Clara's breath caught in her chest. "Will you speak for me?" she asked. "At the hearing, if you want me to." She nodded once. "Then we do it loud." By the next day, the town knew. Clara hung a notice on her laundry door, "Business closed until further notice." Not due to debt, due to pride. It was handwritten, and she made sure to underline the last line twice. She spent the afternoon with Lupe and Zeke sorting through receipts, stamping old ledgers, tying up bundles of contracts in twine. Lupe kept muttering under her breath in Spanish, each curse sharper than the last. "They want to strip you bare," she muttered. "Let's make sure they choke on the thread." Zeke stood at the stove, boiling coffee. "I'll sit in the front row. Might bring a few friends." Clara smiled faintly. "Bring everyone." That night, Silas returned not to the bank but to the laundry. He knocked once, then let himself in. Clara Barr was seated on the floor beside Nina, showing her how to sew a patch into a worn blanket. She looked up when he entered, something cautious but steady in her eyes. "You look tired," she said. "I am." He hesitated, then lowered himself to the floor beside her. Nina grinned at him. "You sew?" He smiled back. "Only my reputation." Clara rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Nina yawned and eventually nodded off her head on Clara's lap. Silas watched the rise and fall of the child's breath, the calm after so much storm. Clara spoke softly. "You never told me why you came here." He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I came west to outrun something," he said, "but ended up building a wall around it instead." "Did it work?" "For a while." Clara traced the stitch with her fingers. And now he looked at her eyes, darker in the low firelight. "Now I wonder if I came here to find something instead." She didn't answer. The warmth between them was enough. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, everything was quiet. Silas stood and reached for his coat. "I'll see you at the hearing." Clara stood too. "They'll try to rattle me." Let them, he said. You don't shake easy. He reached for the door, then paused. They'll want you small, he said. If you want them to hear you, Clara, you'll have to speak in a voice they can't ignore. She looked at him, chin lifting. I intend to. As the door closed behind him, Clara returned to the fire and pulled the blanket around Nina's shoulders. Then she sat down beside her again and picked up the needle. Tomorrow she would face a town that wanted her gone. Tonight, she was still here, and that had to be enough. Dignity doesn't come from permission. It comes from what you won't let them take. The courthouse stood like a clenched fist at the center of town, old stone walls, narrow windows, and a bell tower that hadn't chimed in years. Clara stood just outside its front doors, shoulders squared, the chill of early morning biting at her cheeks. She wore her cleanest dress, plain gray wool with mended cuffs. Her boots were polished. Her hair was pinned back tightly the way her mother used to wear it when there was something serious to do. A crowd had already gathered. Most of the town, it seemed, had shown up. Some wore curiosity on their faces, others quiet judgment. A few looked guilty just for being there. Lupe stood near the front steps, arms crossed, chin lifted like she might fight off the whole council with just her eyebrows. Zeke leaned against a post hat, low over his eyes, chewing something like he was waiting for an excuse. Silas wasn't there yet. Clara didn't look for him. She stepped through the door alone. Inside, the old courtroom smelled of pine soap and dust. The benches creaked as people shifted, murmuring and nodding toward her. The council sat at the front, a row of familiar faces, all dressed in Sunday black. Pastor Dunn, Mrs. Templeton, Judge Harrow, who'd once fined Clara for hanging laundry too early on a Sunday. She took her place at the center table. Her ledger sat beside her, tied with a strip of cloth. Her hands rested on top, steady even though her stomach churned. The judge banged the gavel. This hearing will address the request to review and potentially revoke the business license of Miss Clara Redbird based on concerns presented by community members regarding ethics, morality, and business conduct. Clara's throat tightened. He went on reading out the charges, like a man listing sins: undue influence, inappropriate favoritism, implied impropriety. The words floated like smoke in the air, hard to see through, but thick enough to choke on. Miss Redbird, the judge said at last, you may begin your statement. Clara rose slowly. Her knees didn't buckle, though they wanted to. She stepped forward, the ledger still in her hand, and looked out at the crowd. I've lived here 6 years, she said. I've paid every bill, kept every promise. My business is small, but it's honest. I serve this town every day, its schools, its hotels, its homes. Somewhere in the crowd, a child coughed. She didn't look over. I'm here today because people don't like the idea that a woman like me could survive without asking their permission. That I could work with a banker and not be owned by him. That I could take help and still keep my dignity. She looked straight at Mrs. Templeton. Dignity doesn't come from permission. It comes from what you won't let them take. A murmur rippled through the room. She opened the ledger. Here's every order I've filled in the past 2 years. Signed, logged, paid. I've broken no laws, no contracts, no promises. Judge Harrow cleared his throat. Miss Redbird, this hearing isn't about your bookkeeping. Then what's it about? She interrupted, her voice sharper now. Because nobody here can say I didn't do the work. What they can say is they don't like me. They don't like that I didn't crawl when my husband died, that I didn't leave when the debt came, that I took a loan and paid it off week by week without ever missing, that I earned a little respect without sewing it into someone else's name. Gasps, a few whispers, but no one stood up to stop her. She turned to the council. You want to take my license, then say it. Say that a woman like me, widowed poor, running a business with her hands and not her husband's name, has no place in this town. But don't hide it behind morality. Don't call it concern. Just call it what it is. Silence thickened. Then the door at the back opened. Silas stepped in coat in hand, walking like he already knew the ground beneath him was cracking. He made his way to the front without apology. Judge Harrow frowned. "Mr. McAllister, this is irregular. I was asked to testify," Silas said, calm as a still pond. "You'll have your turn." Clara stepped back, her chest tight. She didn't know what he'd say. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Silas faced the room, his voice steady but low. "I'm the one who bought Clara's debt." He let that settle. She didn't ask me to. She didn't know I had until the day I walked into her laundry and gave her the terms. They weren't generous. They were fair. She paid every cent. No favors, no delays, no requests for leniency. More silence. "I gave her gloves," he said, "because her hands were bleeding through the wash water. I fixed her roof because it was collapsing. I brought apples for her sister, because no child deserves to wake up hungry." He met the eyes of every council member in turn. "If you think that's scandal, then I pity your houses." Murmurs grew into quiet agreement. "I've worked in towns where corruption was hidden behind fine collars, where help only came with ownership. Clara Redbird doesn't owe me anything. But this town, it owes her the truth." He looked at the judge. "She's not on trial, you are." The gavel slammed. "That's enough." But the damage was done. Whispers bloomed like fire across dry brush. Faces changed, some with shame, others with sudden pride. Clara saw Lupe sit straighter. Zeke's mouth twitched, barely holding back a grin. The council conferred in hushed voices. Clara stood still, her hands folded over the ledger again. Judge Harrow cleared his throat. After review, he said, eyes scanning the room instead of her, "We find no legal grounds for revocation. The license stands. The hearing is closed." A rush of relief surged through her chest, but she didn't show it. Not here. Not yet. As the crowd began to move, someone clapped, then another, until the sound filled the room, not loud or wild, but honest. Earned. Clara walked out into the sunlight. The town square looked different. Or maybe she did. Silas waited at the bottom of the steps. She stopped in front of him. "You didn't have to say any of that." "I wanted to." She looked at him a long time. "Why?" His voice was quiet. "Because when you stood up, I remembered what it meant to follow someone worth standing behind." Her throat tightened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" she asked. "Your deed. Paid in full." She stared at it. "I still owe not anymore. I don't need charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's a return." "For what?" "For teaching me how to believe in people again." She didn't cry. Not there. Not with all those eyes still watching. She just took the deed, held it in her hand, and let the wind carry away the part of her that ever needed permission to belong. Freedom isn't just survival. It's having something no one can take from you. The laundry door creaked open, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't followed by silence or whispers. The bell chimed light and clear. Clara stood behind the counter, brushing lint from her apron, her head high. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm against the freshly scrubbed floors. The walls smelled of starch and soap, but also of something else now. A beginning. Zeke stepped in first, carrying a sack slung over his shoulder and a grin riding low on his face. "Got my Sunday coat and the missus' good linen," he said. "Figured now's as good a time as any to stop looking like we've given up." Clara nodded and reached for the sack. "You've never looked like you gave up, Zeke." "Well, now I can at least smell like I didn't," he joked. Behind him came others, Mrs. Melrose with her lace sheets, young Pete with a stack of work aprons from the sawmill. One by one they returned, not with apologies, but with trust. By noon, Clara had filled the board with new orders and Nina was humming from the back room as she sorted buttons. Lupe stopped by with cinnamon bread unwrapped and still warm, placing it on the table like a peace offering to the gods of weariness. "I hear Mrs. Templeton's in a bit of a mood," Lupe said, slicing a piece for Clara. "Apparently no one wants to buy her preserves at market anymore." Clara didn't look up. Maybe she should try flavor next time. They both laughed. But even in that laughter, Clara knew something had shifted. The town hadn't changed its heart, at least not all at once. But it had changed its rhythm. It no longer turned its back when she walked by. No longer paused its conversations when her name was spoken aloud. Some things were still stiff with habit, but the frost had begun to melt. The real surprise came just after dusk when Silas knocked. Not at the laundry, at her front door. She opened it slowly, finding him without his coat. This time just his sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. "Evening," he said. "You're early for laundry and late for supper." He smiled faintly. "I didn't come for either." She stepped aside. The room smelled of bread and warm wood. Nina was asleep on the settee, curled beneath the blanket they'd stitched together months before. Clara motioned toward the kitchen table where a pot of beans still steamed gently. Silas sat folding his hands in front of him, like a man making a quiet offer. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's usually how your trouble starts." He smirked, but there was something serious in his eyes. "When I came here," he said, "I thought I was done. Not in any grand way. Just finished. I'd lost more than I cared to name. I figured the West would give me a quiet place to wait out whatever came next." "And you happened." Clara stirred the pot slowly. "You don't strike me as someone who lets others change his course." "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "I didn't know I needed one." She sat across from him, folding her arms on the table. "I'm not looking to be rescued," she said. "I know. And I'm not a prize for fixing someone's guilt. I'm not trying to fix anything." "Then what is this?" Silas looked at her, voice steady. "I don't want to offer you anything with conditions. No promises, no saving. I like being in the same room as you, that's all." Clara didn't answer right away. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was full of weight, of decisions half-formed. "I spent so long just surviving," she said. "I don't know what it feels like to want something and not fear losing it." He leaned forward. "Freedom isn't just survival. It's having something no one can take from you." She studied him. "And what if it's still taken, then you build it again? Or you find someone who'll help you do it?" Nina stirred on the couch, murmured something soft, and then rolled back into sleep. Clara reached for the bread on the counter, broke off a piece, and handed it to him. "No more apples," she teased. "I figured you were tired of fruit." They ate in silence, but it wasn't empty. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't reach for her hand, didn't try to kiss her. He just looked at her like she mattered. And then he said, "If you ever want to start again, whatever that means, I'd be proud to be part of it." She walked him to the door, As he stepped out, the sky overhead was violet with stars. "You might be stubborn," she called after him, "but you're not nearly as clever as you think." He turned. "Good thing I don't have to be. You've got enough clever for the both of us." Clara watched him go, the soft crunch of his boots in the street, dust steady and sure. She closed the door and leaned her forehead against the wood. Her heart wasn't racing. It was steady. Not hope. Not yet. But the space where hope could start. The next morning she rose before the sun. The fire was already lit in the stove. She started a fresh pot of coffee, opened the shutters, and stood in the doorway for a long moment. The town was quiet. Her sign still hung outside. Redbird Laundry, open. Paid in full. She'd built something, and this time it wasn't just to survive. It was hers, entirely. And no one, no banker, no counsel, no whispering woman behind a lace curtain could take that away. You can learn a lot about a man by the way he stands when things don't go his way. The wind kicked up dirt in long, dry swirls as Clara crossed the edge of town, her coat pulled tight, boots cutting through the brittle grass. She wasn't used to leaving the laundry in daylight hours, but today wasn't about work. It was about the man who hadn't returned. Silas had sent no note, no knock. Nothing since that night at her table. Lupe said he'd left early 3 mornings ago. Horse-saddled bags tied down something stiff in his shoulders, like he was riding toward a decision and away from a mistake. He hadn't told Clara. She kept walking past the grocer, past the chapel, past the freight station, where she used to wait for her husband's body to return. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt. Her lungs ached with the cold. Silas's small house stood at the edge of the ridge near the old tree line where the land sloped off toward the valley. It was neat, weather-worn windows closed like eyes unwilling to look back. Clara climbed the front steps and knocked. No answer. She tried the handle. Unlocked. The door creaked open. Inside it smelled of old coffee and cedar. The fire was dead. Papers lay scattered on the desk, a ledger cracked open beside a sealed envelope. Clara stepped in slowly, her heart tight. The envelope had her name on it. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she looked around. The house was lived in, but careful. Books lined the far wall. His overcoat was still hanging from the peg. A boot brush sat beside the door, dust still fresh in its bristles. She picked up a folded shirt from the back of a chair, ran her fingers across the collar. Clean pressed. Done by her hand, likely though she couldn't recall this exact one. It felt like he was still here. It also felt like he might never be again. She sat on the edge of the hearth, holding the envelope until her fingers grew numb. She'd thought she was done with hope, with waiting. She'd been wrong. The door opened behind her. Clara turned. Silas stood in the frame, wind-cut and hollow-eyed, like someone who'd fought through a storm that hadn't quite passed. "You're in my house," he said softly. "You left your door open. I wasn't expecting company. You weren't expecting me." He walked past her, tossed his gloves on the table. "I had to think. You do that often. This time I needed to do it away from you." That landed sharp. She stood stiffly. "You rode off in the middle of the night and left me a letter. I didn't write it." She blinked. "It has my name on it." "I couldn't finish it." It felt like lying. "Because it was." He turned to her fully. "Because it wasn't enough." Clara stared at him. "Then tell me what is." He didn't answer at first, just ran a hand through his hair and looked toward the window. "I've made my life by keeping things measured," he said. Money, time, distance, emotions, measured and safe. And now you are not measured. You're not safe. You make everything else I know seem small. Clara took a breath, shaky and deep. So you ran. I ran, he admitted. Because you matter. The fire inside her cracked, burning hotter now, not in anger but clarity. You don't get to decide when you matter, she said. You don't get to disappear and then come back expecting me to wait like a good little laundress. I don't expect you to wait. Then why are you here? He crossed to her close now, not touching. Because I don't want to miss it, he said. Not if there's a chance. A chance at what? Something that isn't built on debt or silence. Something we both chose. She studied his face, lined, tired, hopeful in a way that hurt. You can learn a lot about a man, she said slowly, by the way he stands when things don't go his way. He met her eyes. How am I standing like you're still learning how to stay? Neither moved. Finally, she lifted the envelope, handed it to him. I didn't read it, she said. Felt like it wasn't mine. It was a goodbye. She waited. He tore it in half and tossed it into the cold hearth. I was wrong, he said. Clara's jaw set. About what? Thinking I had to go to keep you safe. She softened. You don't have to protect me, she said. You just have to show up. I'm here. For how long? As long as it takes. The wind knocked lightly at the window pane. Inside, everything stilled. Clara looked around the room again, plain, practical, honest. It reminded her of her own space, of survival. But there was something different now. She stepped forward and reached for his hand. He didn't flinch. You ever think about starting over? She asked. Every day, not alone. He didn't smile, but something in his shoulders released. I'm not good at soft things, he said. I'm not asking for soft. What then real, she said. His thumb brushed her knuckles. I can do real. She believed him. Not because he said it, but because he didn't promise. Outside, the wind began to settle. Inside, the fire wasn't lit, but warmth had returned. Clara sat back down on the hearth. Silas joined her. They didn't talk about the future, or what people would say, or how it might all still fall apart. They just sat. Two people who had survived everything but each other, and finally had stopped running. Love wasn't a rescue. It was a place you walked toward together, even with your hands still shaking. The day broke cold, but clean. Snow had fallen in the night, just a light dusting enough to hush the ground and tuck the sharp edges beneath something softer. Clara stood on her porch with a mug of coffee cupped in both hands, watching the town come to life. Smoke rose from the baker's chimney. A wagon creaked past with hay piled high. Children shouted down the street, their boots crunching through the frozen slush. Familiar sounds. But today they sounded like they belonged to her, not just around her. Inside, Nina set the table with unmatched dishes humming as she worked. The girl's face was brighter lately, a little rounder with the weight of worry no longer sitting on her ribs. She placed a fork just a bit crooked and fixed it with a grin like everything could be made right again if you just straightened the details. Clara smiled at the sight, then stepped inside. Zeke says the post office got in a shipment of new books, Nina said. He's going to let me pick one after chores. You finish your reading lessons first, Clara replied. I will. Nina said, I'm almost to page 12 without help. I'm proud of you. The girl beamed. There were no customers yet at the laundry, no rush orders, no shouting from across the alley, no broken latches or boiling over pots. Just the steady warmth of a fire and a room that finally felt like home. Clara walked through it slowly, running her hand along the folded linens, the line of hooks, the clean counter she'd scrubbed herself. Every thread in this room had passed through her hands. Every wall, every choice, every survival. It didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like something holy. By mid-morning, Lupe arrived with 2 pies and a bottle of cider. "It's not a celebration if no one eats," she said, brushing snow from her sleeves. "I didn't say it was a celebration. You didn't have to. You've got that look." "What look? That I made it, and I'll be damned if anyone steals it from me again, look." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's very specific. It's a good look." They laughed and set the pies on the table. Lupe poured 2 mugs of cider and handed one over. "You thinking about what's next?" she asked. "I haven't stopped." "And I don't want more," Clara said. "Not the way people mean it. Not bigger or busier or richer. Just steadier, quieter. I want just this, but without the fear." Lupe raised her mug. "To no more fear." Clara clinked hers softly in return. "To choosing peace." The door opened not long after. Silas stood there in a dark wool coat, snow on his collar, eyes clear. He said nothing at first. Just nodded at Lupe, who gave him a knowing look, and slipped into the back without a word. Clara walked to him slow. He handed her something small and wrapped in linen. "What's this? Open it." She unwrapped it carefully, uncovering a silver thimble worn old, dented on one side. Her breath caught. "This was my mother's," he said. "She used to stitch clothes late into the night so we could afford boots." Clara turned the thimble in her hand. It was nothing grand, but it was everything. She gave it to me before she passed. Said, "You'll know the right hands to give it to." I didn't understand at the time. Clara looked up, her voice low. "And now I do." She placed the thimble on the shelf behind her next to a chipped teacup and a photo of her and Nina on the first day in the new place. It fit like it had always belonged there. Silas stepped closer. "I never wanted to be the man who saves the day. I just want to be the one who stays when it gets hard. I'm not easy. Neither am I." They stood close now, the space between them no longer holding fear, but memory, everything they'd gone through, everything they still carried. "Do you want to build something?" Clara asked. "With you?" "Yes. Not a house, not a business, I know. Something that doesn't break when things get ugly." Silas nodded once. "Something that's worth the work." She looked at him then, not with guarded eyes or the caution of someone who expected the world to fall apart, but with the quiet bravery of someone who was ready to let it stand. He reached for her hand. Clara let him. They stayed like that a moment, the hum of the fire behind them, the distant clatter of horses in the street, the echo of children's laughter somewhere beyond the window. "I don't need grand," she said. "I need real." "Then we'll start there." Later, when the sun had softened and the sky turned that pale kind of gold that only came in winter, Clara stepped outside again. The snow had stopped. The town was settling down for the evening. She looked back at her little building. Warm light in the windows, Nina reading in the corner, Lupe still humming in the back. Silas pouring cider with one hand and stoking the fire with the other. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Love hadn't come crashing in like a storm. It hadn't pulled her from drowning. It had simply stayed. It had shown up, day after day, quiet and steady. Love wasn't a rescue. It was a place you walked toward together, even with your hands still shaking. Clara turned back to the street, and for the first time in a long time she didn't feel like someone watching from the edge. She felt like someone who had arrived.